They were gone, presumed dead, until one day they came back. But they weren't the same, and neither were the stories they carried. This is the chilling truth of 3 disappearances that ended in the most unexpected way. Subscribe for more stories that don't just haunt the news, they haunt the people left behind. This is Roadside Tales. Case 1. Stephen Stayner, the boy who came back. It was December 4th, 1972. In the quiet town of Merced, California, a 7-year-old boy named Stephen Stayner was walking home from school. He had taken that walk many times. It wasn't far. He was the youngest of 5 children in a hard-working religious family. There was nothing unusual about the afternoon, until Stephen didn't come home. At first, no one panicked. Maybe he stopped to play. Maybe he visited a friend. But as night fell and the hours passed, a creeping dread settled in. By midnight, his parents called the police. And from that point forward, Stephen Stayner became a name the town would never forget. The search was immediate and frantic. Flyers went up. Canvases were done. The local news covered the disappearance heavily, but days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into years. No trace, no sightings, nothing. It was like Stephen had vanished into the air. His parents never gave up hope, but behind every prayer was a quiet fear Stephen might be gone forever. But he wasn't gone. Stephen was alive. Just not as Stephen anymore. On that rainy December afternoon, a man named Kenneth Parnell had approached the boy with a church pamphlet. Parnell wasn't alone. He had brought along a co-worker named Edward Murphy to help him lure the child. They posed as ministers collecting donations. Parnell offered Stephen a ride home. The boy, trusting, agreed. He never made it back. Instead, Parnell drove Stephen 200 miles away to a remote area near Cathy's Valley, and then he began rewriting the boy's life. Parnell was a convicted pedophile. He had already served time for sexual offenses, and now with Stephen in his control, he decided to raise the child as his own. He changed Stephen's name to Dennis Parnell, told him his parents didn't want him anymore, and began grooming him with gifts, affection, and slow manipulation. Stephen was just 7. He didn't have the tools to resist. Over time, the lies settled in. The abuse started soon after, emotional, psychological, physical. But Parnell didn't just want a victim, he wanted a family. He enrolled Stephen in school. He took him on trips. He introduced him to neighbors as his son. Stephen went along because he didn't think he had a choice. Years passed. By the time Stephen turned 12, he was no longer the wide-eyed child who vanished from Merced. He smoked. He drank. He had never seen a doctor or dentist since the abduction. But despite the trauma, he began to push back. He skipped school. He rebelled. He questioned Parnell. And when he reached 14, something inside him shifted completely, especially after Parnell came home with another plan. A new boy. Parnell wanted a younger child again. Stephen, now a teenager, watched in horror as the man tried to enlist him to help abduct another kid. Stephen refused, but eventually Parnell found a way, this time kidnapping a 5-year-old named Timothy White. For Stephen, that was the breaking point. He had lived 7 years in silence, but he couldn't watch it happen to someone else. So one winter night in March 1980, while Parnell was at work, Stephen gathered Timothy and escaped. He walked through the rain, flagged down a passing truck, and directed them to the nearest police station. He didn't say much when they arrived, just a few words. "I know my first name is Stephen." It was the first time in years he had used it. The police called Merced. When Stephen's parents answered the phone, they were told something impossible. Their son, gone for 7 years, was alive and safe. The return of Stephen Stayner was a miracle. Newspapers called it a triumph. Cameras showed his tearful family reunion. America watched, captivated. But behind the headlines, reality was more complicated. Stephen didn't remember how to be Stephen. His clothes were different. His mannerisms were older. He had lived like an adult for years. His siblings didn't know how to talk to him. His father tried to impose rules. Stephen ignored them. His mother wanted to protect him. Stephen wanted space. And none of them could understand the weight he carried, the guilt, the fear, the lost years. School was no easier. Classmates whispered. Teachers treated him like a symbol instead of a student. He became known as the kidnapped boy. Some called him a hero. Others thought he was damaged. Therapy was rare back then, especially for boys, especially for trauma. Stephen tried to move on, but he was still just a teenager now with a past most adults couldn't fathom. Meanwhile, Kenneth Parnell was arrested and charged. But the legal system failed to deliver justice. In a stunning disappointment, Parnell was only convicted of kidnapping, not abuse, not molestation, because many of the crimes had occurred outside the statute of limitations or were hard to prove. He was sentenced to just 7 years and served 5. Stephen testified at the trial. Calm, steady. He wanted to protect Timothy White, now his friend. The two remained close bonded by something no one else could understand. Stephen tried to live a normal life. He got married. Young had 2 kids, worked at a pizza shop. But the past never fully left. Then came tragedy. On September 16, 1989, Stephen Stayner was riding his motorcycle home from work when he was struck by a car that turned in front of him. He died at the scene. He was 24 years old. At his funeral, hundreds gathered. His brother, Cary Stayner, gave a speech. But years later, Cary would become infamous himself, arrested in 1999 as the Yosemite Park serial killer responsible for the brutal murders of 4 women. The Stayner family's story darkened again. As for Stephen, his legacy lived on in other ways. The TV movie I Know My First Name is Stephen aired in 1989 based on his life. His mother later became an advocate for missing children, and Timothy White, the boy Stephen saved, never forgot. In 2004, when Timothy died of a heart condition at age 35, he was buried beside Stephen. 2 boys, 2 survivors, forever linked. Stephen Stayner's story is not just about abduction, it's about survival, about identity, about what it means to come home but never truly return to who you were. And in the quiet corners of Merced, people still remember the boy who walked back into town and said, "I know my first name is Stephen." Case 2. Jayme Closs, the girl who escaped the killer. In the early hours of October 15, 2018, the stillness of a small Wisconsin town shattered with a 911 call. No one spoke on the line, but the dispatcher heard chaos, yelling a struggle, and then silence. When deputies arrived at the home in Barron, what they found was grim. The front door had been blasted open with a shotgun. Inside, 56-year-old Jayme Closs was lying just past the threshold, dead from a close-range shot. Further inside, in the bathroom, they found his wife, Denise, also shot, also dead. Their 13-year-old daughter, Jayme Closs, was nowhere to be found. There were no footprints, no fingerprints, no signs of a getaway vehicle, no forced entry other than the door, nothing taken, and no known enemies. The only thing missing was Jayme. Police were baffled. A double homicide in a town of just over 3,000 people was rare. But what made this even more chilling was that it looked surgical, controlled, as if someone had planned it down to the minute with one target in mind. Jayme. The FBI joined the search. Billboards were raised. Flyers flooded the state. A $50,000 reward was offered. For weeks, law enforcement received hundreds of tips, conducted interviews, combed forests. But there was no trace of the girl, no ransom demand, no communication. It was as if she had disappeared into the trees that surrounded her home. And the longer she stayed missing, the darker the assumptions became. Some believed she had been killed and her body hidden. Others suggested she had been taken and trafficked. A few even floated the idea that she had helped the killer. But the truth was far stranger and far more terrifying. About 70 miles north in a wooded area near the town of Gordon, Jayme Closs was still alive, hidden in plain sight. Her kidnapper was 21-year-old Jake Patterson, a former dairy plant worker. No criminal record, no social media, nothing that stood out. He didn't know the Closs family, had never met them. His only encounter with Jayme had been weeks earlier. He had seen her by chance, as she was getting on a school bus. That brief moment, he later said, was enough. He decided right then that he would take her. So he planned. Bought a black balaclava, shaved his head to leave no hair behind, stole license plates to avoid identification, drove to the Closs home not once, but twice, before actually going through with it. The third time, he brought a shotgun. On the night of October 15th, he parked down the road, cut the engine, and approached the house in silence. He blasted the front door open, shot Jayme Closs immediately, then forced his way inside where he found Denise and Jayme barricaded in the bathroom. He ordered Denise to tape Jayme's mouth, then shot her in front of her daughter. Then he took Jayme. He stuffed her into the trunk of his car and drove her for nearly 2 hours. When he brought her into his family's remote cabin in the woods, he told her, "No one is looking for you. No one cares. If you try to run, I'll kill you. If you make noise, I'll find you." And for 88 days, she believed him. He kept her under the bed. Not metaphorically, literally. A space so tight she could barely move. He stacked laundry baskets and storage bins around the frame and weighed them down with barbells. He would leave for hours, even days, with her locked beneath the bed, music playing to muffle sound. He made her stay silent, sit still, disappear. And somehow she did. For nearly 3 months, Patterson was methodical. He told no one. Not even his closest family members knew Jayme was there. The house sat at the end of a long private driveway surrounded by trees. No neighbors, no mail delivery, no curious visitors. But monsters make mistakes. On January 10, 2019, Patterson told Jayme he'd be gone for several hours. As his car disappeared down the driveway, Jayme did something unthinkable. She crawled out from under the bed, put on his shoes, and ran. She didn't know where she was. She didn't have a phone. But she kept moving. Eventually, she came across a woman walking her dog, a woman named Jean Nutter. Jayme ran to her and blurted out the words that would change everything. "I'm Jayme Closs." At first, Jean couldn't believe it. But the girl looked exactly like the photos from the news. Thin, pale, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Jean rushed her to a nearby home and called 911. Within minutes, deputies were en route. Jayme told them everything, who took her where she had been and how she had escaped. Jake Patterson was arrested within hours. He was driving around aimlessly when police stopped him. He confessed immediately, cold, direct, as if the whole thing had been an experiment that had now run its course. He told investigators that he chose Jayme randomly, that he had no remorse, that he believed she didn't try to escape because she was scared, or maybe even liked him. His delusions crumbled in court. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jayme Closs had survived, but survival isn't the end of the story. She returned to Barron a hero, but also a mystery. The town held a celebration. Banners went up. Local businesses offered donations. Her family, now just extended relatives, took her in. But behind the smiles was a 13-year-old girl who had seen her parents murdered and lived through captivity in the woods. A child who had to learn how to breathe again in freedom. She released a brief statement thanking everyone who had helped her, but after that she stayed quiet. No interviews, no memoirs, just silence. Maybe because no one could truly understand what those 88 days were like. Maybe because the trauma was still too close. Or maybe because surviving isn't about telling the world, it's about reclaiming your own. Today, Jayme lives privately. Her story still circulates in true crime forums, news specials, documentaries. But the girl herself has chosen to vanish this time on her own terms. Jayme Closs wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a child who watched everything she loved be torn away in an instant and still found the strength to run when the door finally opened. Case 3. Alicia Kozakiewicz, lured online, and survived. It was New Year's Day 2002 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Most families were still recovering from celebrations the night before balloons, half-deflated party hats on kitchen tables, the world easing slowly into another year. At the Kozakiewicz household, 13-year-old Alicia asked to step outside for a quick walk around the block. She said she'd be right back. She never returned. Her family was stunned. There was no noise, no scream, no sign of struggle. Alicia was responsible. Polite. Not the kind of kid who snuck out or got into trouble. Yet as the hours passed and then the night, one terrifying truth took hold. Alicia hadn't run away. She had vanished. What no one knew was that the walk was a lie. Alicia had left the house to meet someone she thought she knew. For months, Alicia had been talking to someone online, a boy or so she believed, on a chat room popular with teens. He seemed funny, kind, attentive. He liked the same bands, laughed at the same jokes, shared frustrations about school and parents. It felt real, safe, like friendship. But it wasn't a boy. It was a 38-year-old man named Scott Tyree. He had spent weeks grooming Alicia, slowly gaining her trust, making her feel seen, loved, and special. He convinced her that their relationship was a secret worth keeping. And when the time was right, he persuaded her to meet him outside her house, just for a minute, just to say hello. She believed him. What happened next was the beginning of a nightmare. Tyree drove Alicia over 300 miles away, crossing state lines into Herndon, Virginia. There in his basement, he chained her by the neck. He removed her identity, took her clothes, her name, her sense of time. For 4 days, he kept her captive. She was assaulted, degraded, and filmed for others online. It wasn't just about power. It was about display, control, erasure. Outside, her family launched a desperate search. Posters, news stories, community alerts, but it felt hopeless. There were no leads, no witnesses, just silence where a daughter used to be. But then one chance, one sliver of hope. An anonymous tip had come through to the FBI. Someone online had seen something, a video stream. A girl who looked frightened, a background that seemed off, a username that had appeared on dark message boards. The IP address was traced. It led to a modest house in Virginia. Agents moved fast. On January 4th, 2002, they arrived at the door of Scott Tyree's home. He was startled. He hesitated. But inside the basement, they found Alicia still alive. She was chained, bruised, barely able to speak. But she was breathing. And more than that, she looked up at the agents with something rare in these cases: recognition. The ordeal was over. Alicia Kozakiewicz had been missing for 4 days. She returned to her family a different person. The trauma ran deep, but so did her will to survive. Tyree was arrested immediately. He confessed. The digital evidence was overwhelming: videos, messages, grooming patterns. In court, he was sentenced to 19 years in federal prison. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The world moved on. But Alicia didn't stay silent. Unlike many survivors who choose privacy, Alicia did the opposite. She spoke out, loudly. At first it was to her school, then to community groups, then to lawmakers. She told them what no one wanted to admit: that predators weren't lurking in alleyways anymore. They were online. That parents had no idea what was happening on their children's screens. That children didn't need to leave home to be in danger. She became a national voice. Founded the Alicia Project, an organization dedicated to protecting children from internet predators. She worked with the FBI, testified before Congress, advocated for tracking technologies, education programs, and better laws for cyber crimes. And always she told her story. Not for sympathy, not for fame, but because she knew others were still out there. Other children chatting with friends who weren't who they claimed to be. Other families just one message away from disaster. In interviews, Alicia often describes the moment of rescue not just as survival, but as a rebirth. She says she remembers the faces of the agents, the sound of the chain being unlocked, the feeling of sunlight again. She also remembers the silence, the hours when she thought no one was coming, when she had to believe in herself even in the dark. Today, Alicia is still telling her story. Not because she lives in the past, but because the future depends on it. She speaks with composure, with intelligence, with the kind of clarity that comes from facing horror and refusing to be defined by it. And when she ends her talks, she always says one thing that if someone hadn't noticed, hadn't cared, hadn't reported that one suspicious video, she might not be here. Alicia's story isn't just about survival. It's about the digital age, the new landscape of danger, the predators who don't knock on doors but slip through screens, and the strength of a teenage girl who took her story back. Not every child returns, but Alicia Kozakiewicz did, and she made sure the world learned something from it. Some come back, but they never come back the same. What they survived never really let them go. If these stories stayed with you, subscribe for more true accounts that echo long after the road ends. This is Roadside Tales.